I'm Alina Vance, 82 years old, a woman, and I was made homeless by the one son I trusted most in this world. It's a sentence that feels foreign on my tongue, like a line from a play about someone else's tragedy, but it is mine. It is the chilling, unbelievable truth of what happened to me in the twilight of my life, in the very house my husband and I filled with love, laughter, and the scent of baking bread for over 50 years. The house on Maple Street. My late husband, Charles, used to say that house had good bones. He wasn't just talking about the foundation or the sturdy oak beams in the attic. He meant the spirit of the place. We bought it in 1968. I was a young nurse, and he was working double shifts at the auto plant, his hands always smelling faintly of oil and determination. We didn't have much, just two paychecks and a dream that felt as big and fragile as a soap bubble. I remember the day we first saw it. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, and the maple tree in the front yard had turned a shade of fiery red that took my breath away. The paint was peeling and the porch swing was broken, but I walked through the door and I just knew. This was it. This was where our life would happen. And it did. We brought our two boys home from the hospital to that house. David, my firstborn, and 5 years later, Marcus. The walls of that home absorbed the sounds of their childhood, the thunder of little feet on the staircase, the arguments over the last piece of pie, the quiet hum of Charles helping them with their homework at the kitchen table. We marked their heights on the doorframe in the pantry, little pencil lines climbing higher and higher until they towered over me. From the very beginning, my boys were as different as sun and shadow. David was my son. He was born serious, with an old soul in a little boy's body. He was the one who made his bed without being asked, the one whose report cards were a string of perfect A's. He was responsible, focused, and driven. When he set his mind to something, there was no stopping him. He was the first in our family to go to a 4-year college and then on to business school. Charles and I nearly burst with pride. We saw his success as our success, a testament to the life we had worked so hard to build. He was our golden child, the one you could point to and say, "We did that. We raised a good man." And then there was Marcus, my shadow child. He was born with a dreamer's heart and a restless spirit. Where David saw straight lines and clear goals, Marcus saw winding paths and possibilities. He was charming, funny, and could talk his way into or out of anything, but he lacked his brother's discipline. His schoolwork was a constant struggle, not because he wasn't smart, but because his mind was always somewhere else. He drifted from job to job, from one get-rich-quick idea to another, each one ending in disappointment and a quiet request for a little help to get back on his feet. Charles, bless his heart, had a soft spot for Marcus. He saw the good in him, the creative spark that David, in his practicality, sometimes lacked. "He'll find his way, Ellie," Charles would tell me, patting my hand. "Some trees just take longer to grow." But I worried. A mother's worry is a constant, low-grade fever, and my worry for Marcus never broke. Each time he failed, a piece of my heart broke with him, and each time David would be there to help pick up the pieces. He'd offer Marcus a temporary job at his company, causing a loan, or just give me a check to pass along to his brother, shaking his head with a sigh that said, "See, this is what I have to deal with." My trust in David was absolute, granite solid. He was the family's anchor. After Charles passed away 10 years ago, that trust deepened into a complete reliance. The grief was a fog, and I couldn't have navigated it without David. He handled the funeral arrangements, dealt with the lawyers and the insurance companies, and sat with me for hours, just holding my hand in silence. He helped me set up a budget and manage the pension and Social Security. "Don't you worry about a thing, Mom," he'd say, his voice calm and reassuring. "I'll take care of everything." And I believed him. I leaned on him completely. He was my rock, my sensible, loving son who would never let anything bad happen to me. It was a belief I held onto as tightly as I held onto the memory of my husband's embrace. It was a belief that would eventually lead to my ruin. David's wife, Sharon, was cut from the same cloth as him, polished, successful, and always impeccably dressed. She wasn't a warm woman, but she was always polite, always remembered my birthday with an expensive, if impersonal, gift. She and David were a unit, a power couple. They had a large, modern house in a gated community an hour away, the kind of house with more bathrooms than people. They were everything I thought I wanted for my children: secure, respected, and prosperous. In contrast, Arcus lived in a small, perpetually messy apartment on the other side of town. He was divorced, his ex-wife having grown tired of his financial instability. He was always behind on something: rent, car payments, you name it, and I, his mother, was always the soft landing, $100 here, $200 there, to tide him over. I did it out of love, but also out of a deep-seated fear of what would happen to him if I didn't. David would disapprove, of course. Mom, you're enabling him, he'd say sternly. He's a grown man, he needs to learn to stand on his own 2 feet. And then in the same breath, he would write me a check to replenish my funds, a gesture that made me feel both guilty for helping Marcus and grateful for David's generosity. It was a cycle, a family dance we had been doing for 30 years. David, the provider, Marcus, the problem, and me, the worried mother caught in the middle trying to keep the peace. I never once imagined that the provider was the real problem. I never imagined that my son was preparing to cast the longest, darkest shadow of my life. The beginning of the end came on a Tuesday in early May. It was a beautiful spring day, the kind where the sun feels warm on your skin and the world seems full of promise. My hydrangeas were just starting to bloom, their heads like big, puffy blue clouds along the walkway. I was humming to myself in the kitchen, preparing a pitcher of sweet iced tea, when I saw David's sleek black car pull into my driveway. It was a surprise visit, which was unusual for David. He was a man of schedules and appointments, but I was delighted. A visit from my eldest was always a treat. A moment later, he and Sharon were at my door, all smiles and hugs. Mom, you look wonderful, David said, kissing my cheek. He looked handsome as ever in a crisp button-down shirt and tailored slacks. We were in the area for a meeting that ended early and thought we'd pop in, Sharon added, handing me a small, perfectly wrapped box. It was a designer scarf, soft as a whisper. Just a little something. Oh, you shouldn't have, I said, my heart swelling with pleasure. Come in, I just made some tea. We sat at the old wooden table in my kitchen, the same table where I'd bandaged skinned knees and celebrated birthdays. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It felt so normal, so comfortable. For a while, we just made small talk. David asked about my garden, and Sharon complimented the lemon loaf I'd set out. It was all so pleasant, so disarmingly ordinary. Then David leaned forward, his expression shifting from casual to serious. Mom, he began, his voice taking on the gentle, patient tone he always used when explaining something important. Sharon and I have been talking, and we've been a little worried about you. My brow furrowed. Worried about what, dear? I'm fit as a fiddle. I know, he said with a placating smile. But we need to think about the future, about protecting your assets, specifically this house. I looked around my kitchen at the floral wallpaper I'd picked out with Charles, at the faint scorch mark on the counter from a long-forgotten cooking mishap. This house wasn't an asset. It was my life. Protect it from what? I asked, a little confused. Well, all sorts of things, David said smoothly. Medical costs, taxes, you know how complicated things can get. With Dad gone, the estate is solely in your name, which makes it vulnerable. We were talking to our financial advisor, and he said the smartest thing to do would be to move the house into a different legal structure. It's a way of protecting it for the family, to make sure it stays where it belongs, no matter what happens. Sharon chimed in, her voice earnest. It's what all our friends with aging parents are doing, Alina. It's just smart planning. It takes the burden off you. We want you to be able to live here carefree for the rest of your days without worrying about a single thing. The word aging stung a little, but I pushed it aside. They sounded so sensible, so caring. They were looking out for me just like David always had. I don't understand all this legal talk, I admitted, feeling a bit foolish. It all sounds so complicated. That's why I'm here to handle it for you, David said, his hand covering mine on the table. His touch was firm, reassuring. I've had my lawyer draw up the necessary paperwork. It's a simple transfer. Basically, it puts the house under new ownership on paper, but nothing changes for you. You're still the queen of the castle. It just protects the home from being seized for, well, for any reason. It's a shield. He made it sound like he was wrapping my home in a suit of armor. And who was I to question my brilliant, successful son, the one who understood the complex world of finance and law that had always been a mystery to me? And he continued, lowering his voice slightly, it also protects the house from Marcus. My heart gave a familiar pang of pain and guilt. What do you mean? I asked. Mom, you know Marcus. He's always in some kind of financial jam. He has debts. If one of his creditors decides to get aggressive, they could try to come after your assets, claiming he has a future stake in the house as an heir. This legally separates the house from all of that. It keeps it safe from his mistakes. That was the masterstroke, the argument that sealed my fate. He wasn't just protecting me, he was protecting the family legacy from my troubled younger son. It felt like a kindness not just to me, but to Marcus as well, saving him from his own worst impulses. It was a solution to a problem that had plagued me for decades. Oh, I said, the single word heavy with years of worry. I see. It's just a few signatures, David said, pulling a handsome leather briefcase onto his lap. He clicked it open and produced a thick sheaf of papers bound in a neat blue cover. I can walk you through the important bits, but it's all standard legal language. My lawyer triple-checked everything. He spread the documents on the table. They were a forest of dense black text that swam before my eyes. Words like quitclaim deed, grantor, grantee, and conveyance meant nothing to me. I saw my name, Eleanor Vance, typed in several places with long, blank lines next to it. David pointed to each line with a gold pen. You just sign here and initial here, he said, his voice a calm murmur. I hesitated for just a second. A tiny voice in the back of my mind, a voice that sounded a lot like Charles, whispered, "Read what you sign, Ellie," but I silenced it. This was David, my David. To question him would be to insult him. It would be like accusing the sun of not rising. It was unthinkable. "All right, dear," I said, taking the pen he offered me. "If you say this is what's best." "I promise you, Mom, it is," he said, his smile warm and genuine, or so I thought. One by one, I signed my name on the lines he indicated. Sharon acted as a witness, adding her own elegant signature beside mine. As my pen scratched across the last page, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. A weight had been lifted, my home was safe, my future was secure, my good son had taken care of everything. David carefully gathered the documents, slid them back into his briefcase, and snapped it shut with a decisive click. The sound echoed in the quiet kitchen. "There," he said, standing up. "All done, now no more worrying, you hear? Let us handle the boring stuff." They didn't stay long after that. They finished their tea, gave me another round of hugs, and promised to call soon. I stood on the porch, waving as their car disappeared down the street, feeling a profound sense of gratitude and love. I had the best son in the world. I went back inside and began to clear the table, my heart light. I picked up the pretty scarf Sharon had given me and wrapped it around my neck. It felt soft and expensive, a gift from my loving family. I had no idea that what I had just signed away wasn't an asset. It was my home, my past, and my future. And the price of that protection was everything I had. Life went on as usual for the next few weeks. I tended my garden, baked my bread, and talked to my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, over the fence. I spoke to David on the phone once or twice. He was busy, as always, but he asked how I was doing and reminded me not to worry about all that legal stuff. He said the paperwork was filed and everything was in order. I felt serene, wrapped in the blanket of security he had provided. The bombshell arrived on a Thursday morning, exactly 3 weeks after their visit. The mail carrier, a young man named Kevin who always had a smile for me, handed me the usual stack of letters, a few bills, a flyer for a grocery store, and a long white envelope. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, Stanton, Finch and Associates. It felt heavy in my hand, official and foreboding. I took it inside, setting the other mail on the hall table. My hands, which had been steady just moments before, now had a slight tremor. I sat down in Charles's old armchair, the one with the worn-out spots on the arms, and carefully slit the envelope open with my letter opener. The first words I saw in stark, bold letters at the top of the page were "Notice of Eviction." I blinked. I must have read it wrong. My old eyes were probably playing tricks on me. I held the letter closer. The words didn't change. My heart began to beat a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. This had to be a mistake, a cruel joke. I scanned the page, my eyes darting over the legal jargon, searching for an explanation. And then I saw it, a sentence that made the world tilt on its axis. In pursuant to the transfer of ownership of the property located at 45 Maple Street, recorded on May 12th from the grantor L. Ener Vance to the new legal owner, Marcus Vance. Marcus, my son Marcus. The letter fell from my hand onto the floor. The air rushed out of my lungs. It felt like I'd been punched in the chest. Marcus, how could Marcus own my house? He couldn't afford to pay his own rent, let alone own a property. It made no sense. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I gripped the arms of the chair to steady myself. My mind reeled, trying to connect the dots. The papers David had me sign, the simple transfer to protect the house. He had said he was putting it into a different legal structure. I had trusted him. I had pictured some faceless family trust, an invisible shield. I never, not in a million years, imagined he meant he was giving my house to his brother. The room began to spin. I saw my husband's portrait on the mantelpiece, his kind eyes seeming to look at me with sorrow. What have I done, Charles? I thought, a silent, desperate cry. I had signed it away. I had signed away our home, the sanctuary we had built with our own four hands. My first thought even then was that David would fix this. This had to be a monstrous misunderstanding. Marcus must have done something, forged something, gotten himself into some terrible trouble that had led to this. David would be furious. He would march down to that law office and raise hell. He would protect me. He had to. With trembling fingers, I picked up the phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial his number. It rang once, twice, three times. This is David Vance. His voice was crisp, professional. David, I breathed, my voice a choked whisper. David, I got a letter. Mom, calm down, you sound terrible. What letters? From a lawyer, David, it says I have to leave the house. It says the house belongs to Marcus. Is this some kind of mistake? Did Marcus do something? There was a pause on the other end of the line. It was only a few seconds long, but it stretched into an eternity. In that silence, I felt the last vestiges of my hope begin to crumble. The silence was the sound of my world breaking. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. It wasn't warm or reassuring. It was cool, detached, and weary, as if I were a difficult client he had to manage. Mom, we talked about this, he said. The blood drained from my face. Talked about what? We never talked about this. You said you were protecting the house. And I did, he said, his tone maddeningly patient. This is the protection. We had to put it in someone's name. Putting it in Marcus's name was the cleanest way to do it. It shelters the asset completely. Shelters the asset, I repeated, the words tasting like poison. David, this is my home, and it says I'm being evicted from my own home. It's a formality, he said dismissively. The lawyers have to send those notices. It doesn't mean anything. Of course you're not going to be thrown out on the street. We're making other arrangements for you. Other arrangements? My voice rose, cracking with disbelief and a rising tide of horror. What other arrangements? I don't want other arrangements. I want my home. Mom, you're getting hysterical, he said, his voice laced with annoyance. This is for the best. The house is old, it's too much for you to manage. We found a lovely apartment for you, a senior living community. It's clean and safe, and there will be people your own age. Sharon and I will even help you move. He was talking about my life as if it were a piece of furniture to be moved, a problem to be solved and put away. The cold, calculated nature of it all hit me with the force of a physical blow. The surprise visit, the scarf, the sweet tea and lemon loaf, the talk of protection, it had all been a lie. A carefully staged performance to trick an old woman into signing away her entire world. Tears were streaming down my face, now hot and silent. You lied to me, I whispered. My own son, you lied to me. I didn't lie, he insisted, his voice hardening. I did what was necessary to secure our family's future. That house is the biggest asset we have. It was irresponsible to leave it sitting in your name. Marcus needed a permanent address, a foundation. This solves everything. It solves everything for you, I cried out, the pain finally erupting into a sob. What about me? What about my life, my memories, your father's memories? Dad would have understood, he said, and that was the cruelest cut of all. He would have wanted what's best for his sons. He didn't say what's best for his wife. In that moment, I understood that in my son's eyes, I was no longer a person. I was an obstacle, an inconvenience attached to a valuable piece of real estate. The eviction notice on the floor was no longer just a piece of paper, it was a verdict. It was the final, brutal confirmation of a betrayal so profound it felt like it had hollowed out my soul, leaving nothing but a cold, echoing emptiness. I had lost my husband, and now I had lost my son and my home in a single, devastating blow. The phone call with David left me shattered. I hung up the receiver and just sat there in Charles's chair, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The cheerful afternoon sun now seemed like a mockery. This wasn't my house anymore. I was a trespasser in my own life. My mind, still reeling, latched onto one last desperate thought: Marcus. Maybe Marcus didn't understand what he was a part of. He could be foolish and easily led, but I had never believed him to be cruel. David had likely manipulated him, fed him a story, just as he had done with me. If I could just talk to Marcus, appeal to the son I had raised, the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard, maybe I could make him understand. It took me a long time to find the courage to dial his number. My hands were still shaking. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice wary. "Hello. Marcus, it's your mother." "Oh, hey, Ma," he said. He sounded guilty. That one little word confirmed he knew. He knew everything. "Marcus, I need you to tell me what's going on," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I got a letter. It says you own my house." He was quiet for a moment. I could hear him take a deep breath. "Ma, look," David explained it all. It's for the best, for the whole family." He was reciting a script, David's script. "Best for who, Marcus?" I asked, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. "Is it best for me to be thrown out of the only home I've known for 50 years?" "Nobody's throwing you out," he said, his voice rising in defense. "David's getting you a really nice apartment. He showed me pictures. It's got a pool and everything." A pool? He was talking about a pool while my heart was breaking into a million pieces. The sheer absurdity of it, the childishness of his justification, was almost more painful than David's cold logic. "I don't want a pool, Marcus," I said quietly. "I want my home. I want the garden your father planted. I want the porch where we sat on summer nights. Did you think about that? Did you think about me at all?" "David said he said the house was a burden on you," Marcus stammered. "He said this would help me get on my feet, give me some stability, an asset." There was that word again, asset, my life, my memories, my sanctuary, reduced to a word on a balance sheet. A tool to fix Marcus's perpetual problems, orchestrated by the brother who claimed to resent having to fix them. The hypocrisy was staggering. "And you believed him?" I asked. "You believed it was okay to take your mother's home away from her?" "He said you agreed to it, Ma. He said you signed the papers." He blurted out, his voice a mix of defensiveness and desperation. "He said you wanted to help me." And there it was, the final twisting knife. David hadn't just lied to me, he had lied about me. He had used my love for my troubled son as a weapon against us both. He had painted a picture of a willing, sacrificial mother, and Marcus, in his own weakness and desperation, had chosen to believe it. Because the alternative, that his successful older brother was a monster and he was a willing accomplice, was too terrible to contemplate. "He lied, Marcus," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. It was all I had left. "He lied to us both." I don't remember ending the call. The days that followed are a blur of pain. David started calling, his tone now one of brisk efficiency. He talked about moving dates and packing services. He sent me links to the lovely apartment he had chosen for me. It was in a complex called Golden Vistas, a name so cheerful it felt like a slap in the face. The pictures showed small, beige rooms with generic furniture and windows that looked out onto a parking lot. It looked like a hotel room you'd stay in for a night, not a place you would live out the rest of your days. It was a waiting room for death. I didn't answer his calls after the first one. Sharon started texting me bright, cheerful messages that were chilling in their obliviousness. "Hi, Alina, hope you're getting excited for the new place. Let me know if you need any help picking out new curtains. Zoe." I felt like I was losing my mind. The house, once my comfort, had become a house of ghosts. Every corner held a memory that now felt tainted. I'd stand in the kitchen and remember David as a boy, standing on a chair to help me stir cookie dough, and the memory would curdle, turning into the image of him sliding the papers across that same table for me to sign. I'd walk past Marcus's old room and remember tucking him in at night, and the memory would be replaced by the sound of his guilty, defensive voice on the phone. The betrayal was a physical presence, an intruder that had taken up residence in my home. It sat with me at the dinner table, it lay beside me in my empty bed. It was a constant, suffocating weight. I stopped eating, I stopped sleeping. I would just wander the rooms, touching the furniture, the photographs, the knickknacks, trying to memorize the feel of it all before it was ripped away. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, noticed something was wrong. "Eleanor, are you all right?" she asked me over the fence one afternoon. "You look pale as a ghost." I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. The shame was too great. My own sons had done this to me. How do you explain that to someone? So I just shook my head and said I wasn't feeling well. The eviction notice gave me 30 days to dismantle 50 years of a life. David had, in his generosity, hired a moving company. The day they were scheduled to come, I woke up before dawn. I walked through the house one last time, saying goodbye to each room. I stood in the doorway to the backyard and looked at the rose bushes Charles had planted for me on our 25th anniversary. They were heavy with deep, red blooms. When the moving truck rumbled up the street, its arrival felt like the final nail in my coffin. A team of young men, polite and efficient, came in with boxes and tape. They worked quickly, wrapping my life in brown paper and packing it into cardboard graves. I sat in a chair in the corner of the living room, a silent, invisible spectator to the dismantling of my own history. They emptied the shelves, took the pictures off the walls, and rolled up the rugs, revealing the clean, bare wood beneath. The house grew emptier and emptier, the echoes louder and louder. The last thing to go was Charles's armchair. As they carried it out the door, a sob escaped my lips. It was the only sound I had made all day. One of the young movers looked at me with pity in his eyes. He didn't know the story. To him, I was just another old woman moving out of a big house and into a small apartment. A common, sad little story. He had no idea of the darkness that lay beneath it. Finally, it was all done. The truck was full. The house was empty. One of David's assistants, a young woman I'd never met, arrived in a car to drive me to my new home. She handed me a key. Before I left, I took one last look at the house on Maple Street, the house with the good bones. It looked hollowed out, a stranger. I locked the door behind me, the click of the lock sounding final and absolute. As we drove away, I didn't look back. I couldn't bear to. The cold reality was this: I was 82 years old and I was homeless. My own flesh and blood had made sure of it. The Golden Vistas senior living community was exactly as soulless as the pictures had suggested. It was a long, two-story building of beige stucco that smelled of disinfectant and despair. My apartment, 2B, was on the ground floor, at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway. The key felt cold and foreign in my hand. The movers had already been there. My furniture, which had looked so warm and full of character in my house, looked shabby and out of place in this sterile little box. The rooms were small, the ceilings were low, and the walls were a depressing shade of off-white. There was one window in the living room that looked directly onto the resident parking lot. My view was a sea of sedans and minivans. There was no maple tree, no hydrangea bushes, no garden where Charles's roses grew. For the first week, I didn't unpack. I couldn't. The boxes were a testament to a life that no longer fit into the space I had been given. They were stacked against the walls, forming a cardboard fortress around me. I slept on the sofa because sleeping in my own bed, the bed I had shared with my husband, felt like a betrayal in this strange place. I lived on tea and toast, having no appetite and no desire to use the tiny, unfamiliar kitchen. The silence was the worst part. My house on Maple Street had been full of the gentle, ambient sounds of a life well lived: the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the old refrigerator, the rustle of leaves outside the window. This apartment was unnervingly quiet, a dead, sterile silence broken only by the occasional sound of a television from next door or the slamming of a car door in the parking lot. The silence was a void, and my grief and rage filled every inch of it. I was consumed by memories. They came in waves, battering me. I would close my eyes and see Charles at the grill in the backyard, laughing as he flipped burgers. I would see David and Marcus as toddlers chasing each other across the lawn. I would see myself younger and happier, planting seeds in the garden, my hands covered in dirt. Each memory was a fresh stab of pain, a reminder of everything that had been stolen from me. My anger at David was a living thing. It was a hot, bitter bile that rose in my throat. How could the little boy whose tears I had dried, whose future I had prayed for, grow into a man capable of such calculated cruelty? I replayed that last visit over and over in my mind, searching for a sign I had missed. His smooth words, Sharon's practiced smile, the weight of the pen in my hand. It had all been a charade, a meticulously planned heist of my life. My feelings about Marcus were more complicated. He was weak, yes, and his complicity was a deep wound. But I knew David had played him like a fiddle, using his desperation and his dreams of stability to turn him into a pawn. Marcus was a disappointment, but David was a monster. He had not only stolen my home, but he had also poisoned my relationship with my other son, perhaps irreparably. He had destroyed our family from the inside out, all for a piece of property. Loneliness was my constant companion. In my old neighborhood, I had friends. I had Mrs. Gable next door. We had a community. Here I was anonymous. I would see other residents in the hallway, other elderly women with the same lost, vacant look in their eyes. We would nod at each other, but no one spoke. We were all adrift in our own little lifeboats of sorrow. One afternoon, about 2 weeks into my exile, I finally opened one of the boxes. It was labeled Living Room Photos. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. On top was a framed photograph of me and Charles on our wedding day. We were so young, so full of hope. His arm was wrapped tightly around my waist, and we were both smiling so wide it looked like our faces would crack. I sank to the floor, clutching the photograph to my chest, and I wept. I wept for my lost love, for my lost home, for the sons who had betrayed me. I wept for the woman in the photograph, the bright-eyed girl who had no idea of the heartbreak that awaited her in her old age. I cried until I had no tears left, until my body was racked with dry, shuddering sobs. I lay on the cold floor of that empty apartment, surrounded by the boxed-up remnants of my life, and I felt a despair so profound I thought it would swallow me whole. This was it. This was the end of my story. A sad, lonely old woman tricked by her children, waiting to die in a beige box with a view of a parking lot. David had won. I don't know how long I lay on that floor. Time had ceased to have meaning. But eventually, the storm of grief subsided, leaving behind a hollow, aching calm. I sat up, my old bones protesting, and looked at the photograph still clutched in my hand. I looked at Charles's smiling face, his eyes full of love and determination. And then I looked at my own face, at the young woman I had been. She was a fighter. She had worked night shifts as a nurse, saved every penny, and stood by her husband as they built a life from nothing. She hadn't been weak. She hadn't been a fool. A new feeling began to stir within me, deep beneath the layers of pain and despair. It was a tiny, fragile spark, but it was there. It was anger, not the hot, helpless rage I had felt before, but a cold, clear, clarifying anger. They would not do this to me. David, with his cold calculations, and Marcus, with his weak complicity, would not get to write the last chapter of my life. I had been a victim, yes, but I would not remain one. To give up now would be to dishonor everything Charles and I had built together. It would be letting them win. The spark grew into a small flame of resolve. I didn't know what I was going to do or how I was going to do it, but I knew I had to do something. I was not going to fade away quietly in golden vistas. With a determination I hadn't felt in weeks, I got to my feet. I walked into the small kitchen, filled the kettle, and made myself a proper cup of tea. As I sat there sipping the hot, sweet liquid, my mind began to work. David was a businessman. He understood lawyers and contracts. The law was the weapon he had used against me. Perhaps the law was the weapon I could use to fight back. But how? I had no money for an expensive lawyer like the ones David used. My only income was my Social Security and Charles's small pension, most of which was now going to the rent for this miserable apartment. Then I remembered something. Years ago, a woman from my church had gotten into trouble with her landlord. She hadn't had much money, and she'd gone to a place that helped people for free, a legal aid clinic. The next morning, I put on my best dress, a simple navy blue one that always made me feel a little more put together. I did my hair, put on a bit of lipstick, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back was old, tired, and her eyes were full of sadness. But there was a flicker of something else in them now, a flicker of fight. I found the number for the Downtown Legal Aid Society in the phone book. My heart was pounding as I called and made an appointment. It was humbling to have to ask for charity for help. Pride had always been a cornerstone of my character, but my pride had been shattered along with everything else. This wasn't about pride anymore. This was about justice. The clinic was in a modest building downtown T. He kind of place you'd walk past 100 times without noticing. The waiting room was crowded and a little worn, filled with people whose faces reflected their own quiet struggles. I sat there clutching my purse, feeling nervous and out of place. The leaner Vance, a voice called out. I looked up to see a young woman standing in a doorway. She was tall and slender, with intelligent eyes and a kind but professional smile. She couldn't have been more than 45. She was dressed in a sharp blazer and radiated a quiet confidence that immediately put me at ease. I'm Amani Taylor, she said, extending her hand. Her handshake was firm. Please come on in. Her office was small and cluttered with books and files, but it was neat. She gestured for me to sit down and then sat opposite me, her pen poised over a yellow legal pad. So, she said gently, tell me what's going on. And so I did. I told her everything. I told her about Charles, about the house on Maple Street, about David and Marcus. I told her about the surprise visit, the papers I had signed without reading, the eviction notice, the coldness in David's voice. I laid out the whole sordid, heartbreaking story, my voice trembling at times, but I didn't cry. I was past tears. When I finished, I just sat there, exhausted, feeling exposed and vulnerable. Imani was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. She just looked at me, her dark eyes thoughtful. I braced myself for her to tell me it was hopeless, that I had signed the papers, that there was nothing she could do. Instead, she said two words that felt like a lifeline: the cowards. Her voice was low, but laced with a controlled fury that resonated with my own. She wasn't looking at me with pity. She was looking at me with indignation. For the first time, I felt like someone truly saw the injustice of what had happened. Mrs. Vance, she said, leaning forward, what your son David did isn't just immoral, it's illegal. This is a classic case of financial elder abuse and fraudulent conveyance. He exploited a position of trust and confidence to deceive you into signing away your property. The law has protections for people in your exact situation. A hope, real and potent, bloomed in my chest. You mean I can fight this? We can absolutely fight this, she said, her voice firm. And I believe we can win. It won't be easy. They will try to portray you as confused or incompetent. They will claim you did this willingly. But the facts are on our side. You received no compensation for your home. You were immediately rendered homeless by the transaction. And the entire scheme was orchestrated by the son who held your power of attorney for your finances. It's a textbook case. She began to sketch out a plan, her words clear and concise. We would file a lawsuit to have the deed transfer declared null and void. We would seek a temporary injunction to prevent Marcus from selling or taking out a mortgage on the property. We would gather evidence, bank statements, phone records, testimony from neighbors. As I listened to her, I felt my spine straighten. The fog of despair that had enveloped me for weeks began to lift, replaced by a clear sense of purpose. Imani Taylor didn't just give me legal advice, she gave me back a piece of myself. She reminded me that I had a voice, that I had rights, and that my story wasn't over. I walked out of that clinic feeling like a different woman than the one who had walked in. The path ahead was daunting, I knew that. I would have to face my own sons in a legal battle. I would have to air my family's dirtiest laundry in public. It was going to be painful, but for the first time since I'd opened that terrible letter, I felt a glimmer of hope. I was no longer Alina Vance, the victim. I was Alina Vance, the plaintiff, and I was ready to fight for my home. The weeks that followed were filled with a new kind of activity. Instead of wandering aimlessly through my sterile apartment, my days now had a purpose. I met with Imani several times, carefully going over every detail of my life, my finances, and my relationship with my sons. Digging through old bank statements and phone bills was painful, as each piece of paper was a reminder of my misplaced trust in David. But with a Manny by my side, it felt less like dwelling on the past and more like gathering ammunition for the future. Imani was brilliant. She filed the lawsuit and the injunction swiftly. As she had predicted, David's high-priced lawyers responded immediately. Their letters were full of bluster and legal threats, painting me as a confused old woman who was being manipulated by an opportunistic legal aid attorney. They claimed I had willingly gifted the house to Marcus as part of a long-standing family agreement to provide for him. "Don't let this rattle you, Aliner," Imani said calmly after reading me a particularly nasty letter. "This is what they do. They try to intimidate you, Int." "Oh, dropping the case, we won't be intimidated." The process led not to a full-blown trial, but to a mandatory mediation, a final attempt to resolve the issue before it went to a judge. The meeting was to be held at a neutral location, a mediator's office in a downtown skyscraper. The morning of the mediation, I felt a tremor of fear. This would be the first time I would see my sons since my world had fallen apart. I put on the same navy blue dress I had worn to my first meeting with Imani. It felt like my battle armor. Imani picked me up. "Ready?" she asked, her voice gentle. I took a deep breath, as I'll ever be. The mediator's office was on the 20th floor with a panoramic view of the city. The room was dominated by a long, polished mahogany table. David and Sharon were already there, sitting on one side with their lawyer. David looked as impeccable as ever in a tailored suit, but there was a tightness around his mouth I'd never seen before. Sharon sat beside him, her face a mask of polite indifference, though she refused to meet my eyes. Then Marcus came in. He looked terrible. He had lost weight and there were dark circles under his eyes. He saw me and flinched, quickly looking down at the floor. He sat at the far end of the table, as far away from David as he could get, looking like a lost child. I sat down opposite David with Imani beside me. The air in the room was thick with tension. The mediator, a calm, gray-haired man, explained the process. Then he turned to Imani and said, "Ms. Taylor, would you like to begin?" Imani opened her file. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't resort to theatrics. She simply and methodically laid out the facts, her voice cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. She detailed my 50-year history in the home. She presented the evidence of David's complete control over my finances. She showed how I had received no payment for the house, a property valued at over $500,000. She described the surprise visit and the deception. "This was not a gift, it was a theft," she concluded, her eyes fixed on David. "A theft perpetrated by a son against his own mother, exploiting her trust and her age for his own financial gain, and using his vulnerable younger brother as a pawn in his scheme." David's lawyer jumped in, blustering about family agreements and my supposed cognitive decline. But Imani was ready. She had a signed affidavit from my doctor confirming I was of sound mind, and a statement from Mrs. Gable about my distress and confusion in the weeks following the transfer. The turning point came when Imani addressed the legal consequences. "If we cannot resolve this today," she said, her voice dropping slightly, "we will proceed to trial. And upon winning the civil case, I will be turning over our entire file to the district attorney's office with a recommendation for criminal prosecution for financial elder abuse. A felony conviction, Mr. Vance, would not only involve potential jail time, but it would also be disastrous for your business reputation." For the first time, David's composure cracked. A flicker of pure panic crossed his face. He looked at his lawyer, who suddenly seemed much less confident. The threat of public disgrace and prison was a language he understood far better than morality or love. The mediator turned to my sons. "Mr. Vance," he said, looking at David, "do you have a response?" David opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked trapped. He tried to justify himself, stammering about protecting the family's assets, about trying to help Marcus, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Then the mediator looked at Marcus. "And you, sir, what is your version of events?" Marcus had been silent the entire time, staring at the polished table. He looked up, his eyes filled with tears. He didn't look at David, he looked at me. She's right, he whispered, his voice cracking. It's all true. David told me she wanted to do it. He said she was worried about me and this was her way of helping. I wanted to believe him. It was easier to believe him. He took a shuddering breath. I'm so sorry, Ma. I'm so sorry. A sob escaped him and he buried his face in his hands. That single, broken confession shattered whatever was left of David's defense. The room was silent save for Marcus's quiet weeping. Sharon put a hand on David's arm, but he shook it off, his face pale and slack. He had been beaten. The rest was a formality. Their lawyer knew they had no choice. An agreement was drawn up. The quitclaim deed would be declared void. The title to my house would be restored to my name, effective immediately. David would cover all legal fees, including Imani's. I signed the agreement, my hand steady this time. When it was over, I stood up. I didn't look at David or Sharon. I just walked out of the room with Imani by my side. That afternoon, Imani drove me back to Maple Street. She handed me the new official document conf. Erming I was, once again, the sole owner of my home, and she gave me a new set of keys as we'd had the locks changed. Walking up to my front door felt surreal. I put the key in the lock. It turned smoothly. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was still empty, of course. The rooms were bare and my footsteps echoed on the wooden floors, but it didn't feel like a stranger anymore. It was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet. It was my quiet. It was my home. I walked to the window and looked out at the backyard. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light on Charles's rose bushes. They were still there, waiting for me. I had a lot of work to do. I had to bring my furniture back, unpack my life, and chase away the ghosts of the past few months. But standing there in the silence of my reclaimed sanctuary, I knew I was going to be all right. I was home. The weeks after I moved back into my house were a time of healing. My furniture was delivered from the storage unit David had been forced to pay for, and slowly I put my life back together. Each photograph I hung on the wall, each book I placed on the shelf, felt like an act of defiance and reclamation. Marcus came to see me. He stood on my doorstep looking lost and ashamed, and he apologized again, this time without lawyers present. His remorse was real. I could see it in his eyes. I haven't forgiven him completely. That's a scar that will take a long time to fade, but I have let him back into my life tentatively. He helps me in the garden now. We don't talk about what happened, not directly. We just work side by side, trying to nurture something new from the broken ground of our relationship. He is finally trying to stand on his own 2 feet, and for that, I am grateful. I have not seen or spoken to David since the mediation. I have no desire to. Some betrayals are too deep to be mended. He is a stranger to me now, a ghost from a past life. I mourn the son I thought I had, but I feel nothing for the man he revealed himself to be. The biggest lesson in all of this, it's that family can be the source of your greatest strength, but also your deepest pain. I learned that trust, once broken, can never be fully restored. But more importantly, I learned that I am stronger than I ever knew. My worth is not defined by my children's actions, but by my own resilience. I found my voice in the twilight of my life, and I used it to fight for myself. The house on Maple Street is more than just a house now. It's a symbol of my survival.